This month's Where Did the Road Go is brought to you by three amazing people, Super Inframan, Allison Cook, and 36 Dingo. If you want to become a patron or a sponsor, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And I am here with Mr. Christopher Ernst.
Hello, everybody.
Who has brought us Mr. Steve Berg.
Yes.
Hello, friends.
And this show was Chris's idea because I'm not actually familiar with your stuff.
Yeah.
So
yeah, sure. Well, I mean, people might have heard. I guess I'll do the introduction then. People might have heard Steve on Banal of America or Conspiranormal. I don't know if you did any other sort of Fortean shows.
I've done a few. Yeah, did Radio Mysterioso.
Yeah, Radio Mysterioso with Greg. But anyway, Steve comes from the entertainment industry, but he is also a Fortean researcher. And in particular, I had just been out at Strange Realities where we had been showing a special preview cut of the film But Where Did the Road Go? Seriah and I have been working on. And Steve did a presentation there on Weird Nebraska, where he's been, he's from and been living for the past a couple of years. He moved back there, and he'll tell you more about that. But some really cool stories about Nebraska, and I think for the Where Did the Road Go listener, this is these types of stories are right up the alley of anybody that anybody's been listening to the show for at any point in time. I think will recognize that the exact kind of stuff that people are into. And I really hadn't heard much about it. And it's funny because I had taken a trip across Nebraska and had thought about this, like maybe, I don't know, before the pandemic. But we were like cutting across there, and I was like, man, we should stop and find some, strange, Fortean places or strange sites. And there was no resources, nowhere to go. So I was really enthralled by your presentation because I was like, oh, we could have done this and that.
No. Obviously, growing up in Nebraska, I was always fascinated with anything going on here locally. But, kind of before the internet, it really was truly like hard to find, good high strange cases in Nebraska. We had the thing that we're probably, in the ufological world that we're best known for is the Herbert Shermer case, where, 1967, the police officer was abducted. And so that actually, occurred like 25 miles from where I grew up in Omaha. And so that was always like so exciting. I would honestly just like sit there in my bed at night going like, wow, someone was abducted 25 miles away from me.
What were the details, just for anybody that's not as familiar with the Herbert Shermer?
Because it is an older case and maybe a lot of people don't know it. Okay, so it was 1967, and this guy, he was a young cop named Herbert Shermer, and he was kind of a war hero, I think that probably would have been Vietnam he fought in, I'm guessing, or Korea. I don't really know which, to be honest. But he came back to Ashland and became like a cop, and he was loved by everyone in the town. And one night he's doing his nightly rounds, like around 2:00 in the morning, and he basically his rounds, like it was such a small town, include like going through the downtown, and then kind of on the outskirts of town, he would go by a filling station to make sure everything was okay. On his way back from the filling station, he sees, it's described a couple different ways, but the way Herbert described it originally was that it was this kind of like, large football shaped thing that had like, a rocket coming out of the bottom, almost like Socorro case where it was like, shooting out fire. Yeah. It landed, which actually at the time, it was on this like highway junction, or it was more like country roads. But the junction was 66 and 6. So it's at the junction of 66, which I always think is a fun detail. It's always left out. But so he goes up, and then, a door opens, and a entity or, alien, for, lack of a better term, pops out and walks up and asks him if he is the watchman of the town. And he, and then they have this short exchange. He has like a wand in his hand, and that's the last thing he remembers. wakes up in his car, or his, police car, cruiser, and goes back to the filling station and tells the sheriff, tells everyone he was in a panic. He filled out a really long police report that night. And then, the next day or, a couple days after, this case was a pretty big deal in the Condon Report.
Yeah.
That, the thing that which was kind of like a whitewashing of UFOs, sort of like, back in Boulder. I can't remember what year. But it was during that. This is a case that they really talked about quite a bit. They even brought Herbert Shermer to some of those, to Boulder. Anyways, but like the local army base came out. And supposedly, actually, someone just forwarded me an old UFO journal that said that they did find a piece of metal kind of by there. But anyways, long story short, Leo Sprinkle gets involved in the case and starts doing hypnosis and regression therapy on him. And he realizes he had like this pretty intense abduction experience, which, I don't know. I love Leo Sprinkle. I think he did some great work. But the hypnosis thing is always kind of suspect.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not like, I don't have a hard stance against it, but to me, it doesn't make, the case any more credible.
Right. Yeah.
But
you can't trust the information retrieved from hypnosis.
I believe the same thing, I just don't think, I think maybe interesting things could be gleaned from it, but that's about it. Right.
Well, I almost wish that it was for this one. Cause one of the things that I really liked always about this, and I think it came out under the hypnosis, was that the aliens had, or the creatures had uniforms that had some weird sort of snake insignia on them.
Yes, that is one of my. Then the symbolism behind that kind of like is interesting, right? Yeah. So like they all had these little badges, and they kind of like looked like their faces kind of looked like old men in like this like onesie jumpsuit with like that covered their head, and they had like an antenna out of their head. So they were. I will say, the drawings he made, they're real cool looking retro type of like aliens, which I love. So I think that was one of the things that attracted me to the case, even as a kid, is that they looked very unique. And but yeah, it was the fallout is kind of interesting. It's kind of the most interesting part sociologically to me is that. So when this happened, right, it became kind of a big story, and like even like nationally, and like all the UFO, Hynek, I think, was involved in it. Yeah. And it was actually taken very seriously, because it was around the time of Socorro, and another cop almost has a similar experience. But the town is a small little like town in Nebraska, and the town completely turned on him.
Really?
The church, oh yes. So the church basically took this as like a demonic thing, and they said he is like a spawn of the devil. So next thing you know, people are burning effigies of him like off bridges in town. They were like I don't know if this is true, but the rumor is they blew up his like civilian car with dynamite. I mean, it was bad. They were throwing bricks through his window. So this poor guy, and he was like in his early 20s. He was one day he's a war hero. The next week he is like a heretic in this town. So he ends up moving and changing his name and really doesn't reappear. And I just found out, I actually was lucky enough to meet his brothers in Ashland at this kind of like, it's kind of ironic. Like 2 years ago, the town of Ashland did this kind of celebration of Herbert Shermer, even though the town treated him like absolute garbage and ruined this poor man's life.
Now the UFOs are.
Now they're parading it in because UFOs are cool again. And I was like kind of begrudging, but I'm like, but I'm going to go check it out because I heard his brothers were going to be there. And hopefully if they're not too swamped with people, I'll get to talk to them. So I ended up going, like 5 people show up, right? So his poor brothers, like, came all the way there. And they're pretty old right now. But because, they were bored, they talked to me for an hour. And one thing that they told me that was really interesting, other than corroborating that they believed their brother till day died, he's like, this happened. I'm not making this up.
Sure.
They did tell me that when they were kids, one of the brothers wasn't born yet, but the oldest one and Herbert and their father had a very dramatic UFO sighting in New Mexico around White Sands back in the early 50s when they were kids. Huh. And that lit up literature because, I feel like the reason why they never brought that up is because back in the 60s, if you were a repeater, then you were like, considered, not credible.
Right. Yeah. Because this is like after the, because this was like 67. So that's far after, when it was permissible to sort of be visited by the Space Brothers.
Yeah. So, not that I scooped that information, but I think I might have scooped that information. So I was pretty excited about that. And, just meeting his brothers and hearing their testimony. They're like, they told me they're like, this ruined his life. He was like a war hero. He was like this like kind of macho cop guy who everyone loved. Next thing you know, he changed his name, moved to Georgia, and became like a fundamentalist Christian.
Wow.
Because he was so troubled by what happened to him.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a sad story in a way, but it's an interesting case, one that's kind of close to my heart. And like,
if people can find like you were talking about, there's some illustrations that are done in sort of like the classic UFO style. I forget what they're from. I want to say maybe a Jerry Clark, but I could be wrong. But they're pretty cool. If you just search for it, it's out there. I remember reading those and being struck by it. It's one of the ones that sort of stuck in my head.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so that's obviously one of my that's the Herbert Shermer story, kind of the short version, but
Right.
that was kind of one as a kid that really just like got my imagination going, just because it was kind of a quasi famous case and it happened so close to me. So I think that was kind of like an initial like big inspiration to me.
Yeah.
Whether it's there's any credibility to it or not, I still every once in a while go out to the site where it happened and just like stare at it.
For something like that, it sounds believable to me. It may not have, it may not have been what he thought it was, but I think he had a real experience there from the sounds of it.
I
totally agree. We know whether something got like exaggerated or repurposed in a new narrative with the hypnosis. I have no idea. But the initial story, like you said, Seriah, I do find pretty darn credible. Yeah.
So the parts of it that are sort of classic high strangeness and the way in which that it sort of he presented. I always felt like this again was one of those legitimate encounters with the other, whatever form it actually took in. And that's really cool.
I totally agree. Yeah, and it kind of goes with part of my or basically the focus of my presentation when I did it at Strange Realities was Eastern Nebraska, where I'm from.
Yeah.
And that, occurs kind of on that eastern line of Nebraska where there is just quite going from the very tippy top of the state all the way to the bottom. That eastern line right along the Missouri River is where I am finding personally. And it's maybe because I'm focusing mostly on that. Because I'm obviously inspired by Keel, like you mentioned earlier. And he always talks about the best way to study this stuff is to take a small microcosm of a geographical location and study the people, study the religion, what do they eat, and you'll start finding weird stuff. So, yeah, that's been kind of my focus, and I'm finding some weird stuff, man. It's been awfully fun.
And you do, what do you do on movies?
So, I'm an actor. I've been, working, I moved to LA probably in the year 2000, and I started doing Second City and a lot of sketch comedy and improv. And that was kind of my, intro to the world. And, next thing I knew, and I didn't really even plan on being an actor, really. I kind of went out there to, I studied film in college and I went to be a filmmaker, kind of make David Lynch ripoff movies. And that didn't, but I ended up becoming an actor, just kind of an accident, because I always loved comedy and I was like pretty good at it. So yeah, I kind of got like an agent manager and then started doing commercials and TV. And yeah, so basically, my kind of like, I guess what I get hired for most is, as a character actor, like small little comedic scenes that they want to juice up a little bit.
Right.
Or
I saw you, you were driving a trolley or tram.
Yeah.
Don't
worry, darling. Yeah, I have a small part in that.
I was like, oh, it's Steve.
Yep. So yeah, it's fun. I love being a character actor. Those are like the guys like Ned Beatty and Brian Dennehy were always my heroes growing up. Those guys who came in for like 2 or 3 scenes and stole it and just, dropped the mic and walked away, So, and not that I'm even in the ballpark of those guys, but like, yeah, I do love kind of the role of being a character actor and doing that. But, obviously, if someone wants to pay me to run around Nebraska and document high strangeness, I'd rather do that. That's hard work to find, let me tell you.
Isn't there a strange, and we were talking about this a little bit in Nashville, but there's sort of this this bleed over from like long form improvisation, or maybe just like the comedy scene in LA, and a little bit of Forteana, like John Tenney, he was right.
Well, I was talking to Tenney about it, and I actually, there's not So I'll give you kind of the long and short of it. So there's this guy named Dell Close, right? And he started he was kind of one of the first founders of the Second City back in the 50s.
Right.
Anyways, he became this kind of guru teacher of improv, like comedic improv and sketch comedy. He was basically the guy who taught and directed and fostered Bill Murray, John Belushi, everyone on the first 10 years of SNL. Even kind of stretching into my generation, Dell Close's influence is really felt all through comedic acting in Hollywood since the, early 70s. But one of the interesting thing where he crosses over into Fortean is that he was a Wiccan. He was a practicing, until the day he died, he was a practicing Wiccan and, and magician.
Yep.
And he rubbed elbows and you have to take everything with a grain of salt when it comes out of Dell's mouth because you don't know exactly what was true or not.
Right.
But apparently he was, tight with L. Ron Hubbard and helped give him the suggestion to turn Dianetics into a religion. He's just this really interesting guy who was super into the occult and infused that into the way he taught improv. When I learned to do improv, long form improv is different than whose line is it anyway? Long form improv is basically you're putting up a one act play that is completely made up for about 40 minutes.
Yeah.
And so the way you start any kind of improv show is, someone comes out and says, can I get a suggestion of something you touched today? And someone would say light bulb. And then everyone in the group who's performing the improv does what Dell called an invocation, and it's invoking to the gods. And he saw creating group mind on stage, and so people would start chanting light bulb, and start doing weird stuff, and everyone would follow, and then it would become this group mind thing, to where it worked so well that sometimes when you were doing a great improv show, you wouldn't be thinking about what you were saying, you wouldn't be writing in your head, you would just go out and it would all work out. So he saw it as you are performing a magical ritual on stage for people. And the result is they laugh.
Yeah.
So, and it really is. And at the time when I was learning it, since I was a kid who, grew up loving occult studies of a lot of different stuff, it really resonated with me. I was like, wow, we're doing magic on stage for comedy.
I didn't realize it was that sort of explicit with Dell Close. That's really crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And the thing is, I think a lot of it was tongue in cheek and he was kind of being overly dramatic and he liked dark stuff. But I think he was dead serious about it too.
Well, that's the whole thing about, you fake it and then it becomes real. I mean, that line between theater and actually, performing workings is, absolutely.
I mean, putting up theater is really just a ritual. It truly is. Anyways, so, that's why all theaters are haunted.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. I mean, beyond the, the whole Sammy Davis Jr. was a Satanist, which he was, he was hanging out with Anton Lavey.
Oh yeah. He was in San Francisco hanging out at the Black House.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think I realized that.
Yeah. He was. There's a whole I think Eddie Murphy does a whole bit about Sammy Davis Jr. Talking to him about man, Satan, he's the real deal.
He's a cool cat.
Yeah, he's a cool cat. Yeah, I forget what it was on, but it's a funny bit.
Well, I mean, not only did Jacques Vallee's kids play Donkey Kong with Anton Lavey at the Church of Satan House, but Sammy Davis Jr. hung out there. A lot of cool things happened.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, all of that, the intersection of that, the occult. It really is. I mean, it's so funny. I didn't know that about Dell Close, but it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense. Yeah.
It does. Yeah, I mean, there's a good book about his life if anyone's interested. It's called The Guru. Funny enough, it's called The Guru.
It's called The Guru, right?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. It does touch upon quite a bit of that stuff.
Yeah.
But it's funny. I think a lot of the people I performed with, or people, I mean, a lot of people you see in TV and movies are learned from Dell's teachings. You'd be very surprised how many of us.
Yeah. Especially this way, I feel like the wave, and for people who aren't familiar, you can see Steve on Drunk History. He did a couple of those. And I'm completely forgetting her name. She was an actor on that bunch. She did a Fortean podcast for a while. I think Tenny was on it. Wasn't it?
Maria.
Yeah.
Yeah, Maria's a great friend of mine.
Right.
She's awesome. Yeah, she's great.
What's the most paranormal thing you've acted in?
Gosh, so in 2010, I attempted a movie about Skinwalker Ranch.
Okay.
And I co-wrote the story, acted it, and like co-directed. So that would be, that was a pure Forteana thing. Now the movie did not turn out exactly like I hope I'd.
As it happens,
as it happens. But, that was definitely like a pretty intense Fortean film, I suppose. But other than that, really nothing, unfortunately. I mostly do, most of the stuff I got hired to do is comedy for sure.
Yeah. It's funny, Steve, actually, before we met up again, Steve was one of the first people that, we talked about for the starring role opposite Go Rightly in The Hill and the Hole. But it was...
That's right. It could have...
conflict for it.
Right. I love that movie, though. I think after it came out, I told you right away.
Yeah.
I was like, man, the movie's so great.
Appreciate it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it can't go wrong when you do something with Go Rightly. But you, So all right. So I want to, even though I like going off the road, I want to go back because I want to hear some of these stories again.
Sure.
Well, my first question though is it strange living in Nebraska?
Right. Yes. That's a good place to start.
God, it is not. I mean, I grew up here, so I lived here till I was 18, then like went off to college and kind of went to LA. So I haven't been, lived here since I was in high school. So that part is kind of weird. But I always came back here multiple times a year. I'm very connected to this part of the country. I just feel it, it's like, I feel like if you grew up with seasons and grew up in a certain place, you feel like weirdly connected to it, and I always like dream about it. And like, I always, even when I lived in LA for those 20 years, I was always like hungry. I was always looking more into Nebraska Forteana than I was California Forteana.
Okay.
Because California stuff feels so picked over.
Right.
It's like we all know everything there is to know about California because it's like one of the studied states of like for high weirdness, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I guess it's strange living in Nebraska. It is somewhat of a culture shock, but Omaha is not small. It's like 1 million people. So in terms of like city stuff, it's kind of got everything LA has, just not an ocean.
Yeah. And probably cleaner air.
Definitely cleaner air. That's for sure.
All right. Well, let's Chris, where were you going to go with that before I interrupted you?
Oh, no, it's fine. I was just going to say, to sort of prompt your story about, I guess, moving back and then what you started studying or like the first few things that you started looking into. Sure.
Well, so when I moved back, it was, I kind of decided to move back. It was right at the beginning of the pandemic. And I started like freaking out because I was like, oh man, my parents are getting older. They're here all by themselves. They have no one if they got sick with COVID. And so I was like, man, this feels like a good time to move back. My wife was cool with it. So when I moved back, my industry was totally like shut down for a year. Yeah. Really. It was like there was not much going on at all. So like what I had known to do for work for 20 years was just like put on hold. So, I just decided to live lean and then kind of dive into Nebraska high strangeness obsessively. And I just had so much fun with it. And so like one thing I could do, because I was trying not to get COVID because I was seeing my parents all the time and I wanted to protect them. Blah, blah, blah.
Right.
That one thing I could do was go out to cornfields with bow hunters and who have seen Bigfoot and go listen to their stories. So I started doing that. I've been doing a lot of contacting historians from small towns and librarians and just seeing, asking them kind of what I'm after, and a lot of times I'll have a case I'm trying to look into more and find information out, or sometimes I'll just cold call small towns and say, hey, do you have a history of any kind of weirdness in the town? And sometimes they'll say no, but I'm being so honest. Most of the time, say, "Oh yes, we have a haunted rec center. I have the keys. I can open it up for you." And they get so excited. Nice. So many of these historians and librarians, I think, are so bored that when someone calls and gives them like a little bit of a challenge or gives them something kind of fun and weird, they are so willing to help. Like it's unbelievable. I have a network of like historians and librarians all over the state who will like feed me little articles. They're like, every once in a while I'll just get an email saying, oh, hey Steve, look what I found. And it'll be an article that is like from 1878 about like an 8-foot tall wild man running in the street. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. So yeah, I just almost kind of like made it my job for about a year when I came back here to look into this stuff and try to document as much as I can because I had this like stress and like worried that all these stories are just going to disappear if someone doesn't do it.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And and Seriah, you probably, and Chris, you guys probably know, but you've heard of Ray Boucher, right?
Yeah.
I don't, yes, but I don't know what it is.
Well, Ray is, he's like an old 40, not old, I shouldn't say old in age, but 40 out of studies. He was 17 years old, and he called Herbert Shermer like the day after he had his sighting. Like he was like he was like friends with John Keel when he was 17, like back in the late 60s. And but Ray has been very helpful to me. He's kind of he had this Fortean Research Society in the 80s and 90s with a couple of the guys, to where when cops in Lincoln, Nebraska would have like a sighting of a Bigfoot on a farm, or so instead of flying saucer landed in their field, they didn't have time to go check it out. The police did. So they would call Ray and his buddies at the Fortean Research Society and say like, hey, do you want to go check out this Bigfoot who keeps on picking apples at this lady's house? And they're like, yes, we do. So they had this like great little thing going for like 2 decades. And they would release these newsletters just called like Nebraskan Fortean Research thing. And I was a huge fan of that. And so that's been like a huge resource for me. And Ray's been really sweet and nice to kind of help me out and send me some old articles and just things he's found to boost up my files. Because I think, I think he wants to get these stories out and preserve them as well. So,
Sure.
Yeah. I'm very serious in preserving the history of Nebraska high strangeness. It's like very important to me.
How open are, like, when you go out with bow hunters and stuff, how open are the people talking about it? Do you get any real hostile sort of responses?
It's not really. Everyone's been pretty nice. Now, the one problem I've run into quite a bit is that, like, the bow hunter, for instance. So there was this guy who I'd heard on a podcast, and he talked about this incredibly like scary, dramatic Bigfoot sighting that like messed him up, like really, really scared him. It was like by a cornfield in Nebraska where they actually have quite a few historically Bigfoot sightings, which that's the thing. People always think, Bigfoot, Pacific Northwest, or, maybe in Ohio. They're everywhere. I mean, these sightings have happened everywhere. Nebraska does not have a lot of forest, which, would kind of lead me to lean towards a more Josh Kutch and Tim Renner idea of what this creature is, but that's besides the point. But so this bow hunter, when I went out with him, he was super reluctant because when I told him my name, he Googled my name and he saw that I was like attached to comedy and acting. So he thought, like a lot of these people think, I'm there to make fun of them.
Oh, okay.
And it's always really difficult. I have to like just talk my way out of it. So a lot of times, like when I find these witnesses, like it's a lot of times, most of the time I convince them that I'm on the level. Just by talking to me, I think they can think like, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about. He's sincere. But it is kind of a hurdle I've come across. So and I don't blame them, because people, there are like a lot of those like comedy shows and stuff like that do make fun of these people, make fun of people. And I hate that stuff. Like that, actually, I'm super sensitive. And like, I would like that kind of sandbag comedy where you're making fun of somebody and exploiting people that's something I would never do. So I have to quell them right away. But this guy wasn't exactly hostile, Seriah. He was kind of just like really scared. When I went out with him, he was showing me the cornfield, like there was like some tree line of forest, and he was showing me a lot of these like, now I'm not like a Bigfoot hunter or anything like that, but he was showing me a lot of structures and like these tree structures that absolutely blew my mind. Like Chris, I think I showed some really briefly because I was,
Yeah.
There is some really weird stuff that I have no idea. Because we were talking, I mean, this is in the middle of nowhere. We are 20 miles from cell service. Right. And like, he would have to go out there with tractors and pulleys and do all this just for me.
Right.
And I don't think he did. Like, and this stuff is like, it's truly like, I have no idea how it happened. It's, there's some of those things I'm like, there's no way that's natural because that tree is like, doesn't even come from this area. Like, it's just really weird stuff. And like in some of the trail cam, footage he has, there's an orb in one of them. And then this other one, there's like, I mean, in like some of these, I'm not sure the validity of them, but in one, there's kind of like a hairy arm and in one of the corners. And but it's really interesting. But him and I have now become kind of friends and he's really comfortable around me. And so every time he still is having activity at the same place. And the thing is, he will not go out there in the evenings with me anymore. Like, I was like, well, would you want to go out there with me? And I can't get on the lands that's private without him. So I want to go there at night, but like, I also don't want to trespass and be a jerk.
Yeah. And it's funny because you say, Bigfoot sightings are everywhere, and they literally are. They're in every state, and there's places that there just could not in any way support a large group of primates. And the flesh and blood people will sort of acknowledge this, but also kind of gloss over it.
Yep.
When I met both Josh and Tim, they were both flesh and blood people. I'm the one who kind of convinced them that, this doesn't make sense. And the funny thing is, I'm still open to the flesh and blood explanation for, say, something in the Pacific Northwest.
Right, same.
It's certainly possible that an undiscovered primate or in the Himalayas or something like that. And like Tim's always like, no. And I'm like, you were such a flesh and blood guy, and now you're so the opposite.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think, wait, am I echoing on your end?
No.
I'm not? Okay, good. I sort of like look at it like it's kind of like the ETH. I'm not totally throwing it out. I think there could be a chance that it's extraterrestrial biological entities from another rock out there.
Sure.
But to me at this point, it's one of the most least compelling, theories about it. I think that feel the same way about Bigfoot, where it's like, sure, they could be flesh and blood, but it's the least compelling to me,
yes.
And I think I heard on you actually on this show where you guys were talking about everything east of like Colorado is the Goblin Universe. How does that go again? Weren't you guys talking about the Goblin Universe?
Yes, but I don't remember that. I think AP Strange brought that up.
Oh, okay. And I like that idea, just because I'd rather see a Bigfoot in the Goblin Universe than the non-Goblin Universe.
I mean, I don't know. And it's people have a problem with it not being both things,
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, when they did a study in like India and they analyzed all this hair and stuff, looking for Bigfoot, and they found an undiscovered bear.
Really?
And I'm like, okay, well, that's not Bigfoot, but it shows you that this stuff is out there that we don't know about.
God, you're absolutely right.
So, I mean, yes, Bigfoot's going to need a lot to eat.
Yeah. But like you said, like, I mean, if you look at like Nebraska on Google Earth, there are forested parts, but it is 95% open field.
Right.
Like, it's just not a place an 8 to 9 foot tall creature could go without being detected. I can't believe that.
And I mean, like the idea of orbs and stuff being seen around areas that Bigfoots is so common.
It's so common.
UFO sightings when there are monster flaps, so common, and both sides will ignore the other part. So it's like, these UFOs were happening right here. We're going to ignore there were also monster sightings.
Yep, exactly. Like, well, there is this very interesting flap that happened the year after Herbert Shermer. It might have been a full year. It might have been like 6 months later. About 25 miles away outside of Nebraska City, there was this ghost town called Minersville. And this place, John Keel actually talked to Ray Boucher when this stuff was happening. And John Keel back then was just kind of coming up with the idea of the window area. And he told Ray, what you're looking into is a window area. And the similarities between Point Pleasant are amazing. All of this happened right by a major river. There's a power plant like a quarter mile away. And what are the other similarities? There was a tragedy. A mine collapsed and killed like 44 teenagers back. And so it's like, I'm like, all this stuff is like these patterns keep repeating themselves. But what they were seeing UFOs, structured craft landing. They were seeing lights all over the Missouri River. There was a ton of Bigfoot sightings and like really dramatic ones. Ones where like there was a report where a teenager got thrown in a ditch. A girl got the back of her car picked up.
Yeah.
There was black cat sightings, like a ton of black cat sightings. So, I mean, like this was happening for like a year and it was like crazy. Like it was just going off there. and then it kind of shut down, just like Point Pleasant. It's very interesting.
The mine collapse, that happened before or after all the stuff?
That happened before, so that's definitely different than Point Pleasant. It wasn't like a harbinger type of situation. But we do have our flying winged humanoids, which I could talk about at a drop of the hat.
Yeah, well, why don't you do that? That's always an interesting subject.
Well, yeah, just about 30 minutes away from Minersville, which I was just talking about, just directly south, right along the Missouri River. In 1957, there was this guy who they called Mr. Hanks. It's obviously a fake name. He was driving home into Falls City, Nebraska, a small little cute town, and he sees what looks like a giant bird like flying in the sky. So he's like, oh, that's kind of weird. And then the thing he sees, the bird, whatever bird he thinks it is, starts getting closer, and he notices that this is not a bird. It looks like what he described as a demon. It was this creature who had like tan leathery skin, like light blue crystal eyes, but the most for his hands were like dove wings that were spread out. But the most interesting part to me is that this entity had what looked like leather straps and a harness to his chest. Like the wings were not organic. They were like mechanical. And so the creature started flapping its wings and was having problems and it was wobbling. And it would turn these dials on its chest. So it had like some kind of technology that it was like futzing with.
It sounds almost steampunkish.
It is so steampunk.
Yeah, right? Doesn't it?
This case is like, it's not famous, but like Keel wrote about it in The Tower, Vallee wrote about it in Dimension. So this one is definitely out there. And it's probably my favorite one just because it is so weird. So this thing had like these leather grid-like wings that were like strapped onto its shoulders. And it started wobbling and having problems. And as it got closer to Mr. Hanks became paralyzed and could not move. And he freaked out. And like, finally this thing gets really close to him and then it just it like corrects the mechanical error and just takes off and then he can move again. But this completely like sort of ruined this guy's life again. Because he talks about how like he did the rest of his life, he took on a second job so he could work more and not have to sleep. He's like, I would only sleep 2 or 3 hours the rest of my life. He's like, I just had nightmares. So he's like, I could not sleep the rest of my life.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was like really troubling. It wasn't one of those like things he saw. It was like, cool, flying wing humanoid. No, it like messed him up.
Sounds like a lot of people are getting like Chapel Perilous sort of instigated with them. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I wonder, if like certain people are predisposed to, I guess everyone is, going along with the bandied about Greg Bishop's co-creation hypothesis. I kind of wonder how, like, if your emotional reaction to this, helps create what you're going to see, like, I don't know, like, because I wonder, like, if Seriah saw the flying winged humanoid, like, because you're more prepared for this. You've experienced a lot of stuff before. If it would behave different for you than it would for someone who's like ontological world just got rattled, I
think about that a lot too, in terms of things, happening. Cause I don't know if I should knock on wood or whatever, but I'm not scared. No. I mean, it's probably, different than sort of how Seriah interacts, but as he's, famously said, this stuff isn't really scary. It's interesting. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not like when I'm in a dark forest or, something like that, it's hard for me to get the creeps. If there's anything anomalous, I find it curious. And I wonder if in some way that, at least for me, less happens because there's no fear to feed on. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder that too. And you kind of, at least with the poltergeist activity, classically in the books I read as a kid, and I don't know how much credence people hold in this anymore, but poltergeist would attack sort of vulnerable teenagers going through like major change.
Well, it was generated by those teenagers.
Right. And I think the same, and that would kind of lend to the co-creation thing, right? They're co-creating a phenomenon, or they're allowing it in. I don't know. Maybe that's different.
I think you're projecting in those cases. You got kids who are generally under a lot of stress, and having issues. And whereas, some kids act out, some people just have this natural PK energy, and that starts expressing itself unconsciously. They're not aware they're doing it.
Right.
And it's entirely possible if there's also an entity there, it might pick up on that energy and start feeding on it.
Right.
Yeah. I sometimes think it's that kind of perfect storm when you get the really weird situations where it's like you have a teenager going through difficult psychological times that has PK there also is some sort of entity or something that exists, either as part of like the location or whatnot. And this is where you get some of these real, like these cases that are just like kind of baffling or really stand out.
Yeah, like, it does seem like it makes you wonder, if to have like a dramatic kind of confirmation experience in high strangeness, does it need to be like this confluence of events that go just perfectly? Like you're in the right state, the weather is right, or you're in such a liminal place or a mystical place. Like, Seriah, do you ever like recall when you've had some of your more dramatic experiences, if like there was like a confluence of liminal things going on?
Oh yeah, definitely in some cases.
Right.
Not all of them.
Right.
But they as I'm writing the autobiography, I'm noticing a lot of stuff happen in packs.
Mm-hmm.
Like what I thought was, oh, this happened, and also this happened, and I'm going, oh, these all happened in like 2 weeks.
Right. And so it's kind of after the fact, after you kind of like deconstruct your last like week or two.
Right.
Oh, wow. This was leading up to something.
And I wasn't looking for patterns like that at the time. So now as I'm working on the book, I'm finding more and more things that that looking at it with my eyes now, I'm going, oh, this makes a lot more sense. You know? Because I also think, sometimes we simply encounter things that we don't have constructs for. Our brains will then either ignore it because it doesn't feel like it's important, or our brains get scared because the unknown is scary. Yeah. And so it will then, that's where the co-creation thing comes in, where it applies to it like, oh, I don't know what this is. It's scary. What's scary? Well, monsters are scary. This must be a monster,
Yep. Yes, exactly. It's like like you're creating an egregore on demand almost.
Yeah. And then the next person who sees that thing, they may see the same energy, or maybe that energy picks up part of what you've put into it. But still, now they have a paradigm because, well, someone saw something weird like a lizard man.
Right.
And now someone else encounters this weird energy and they go, well, that must be the lizard man,
Right.
And it's not conscious. Their brain just fills it in because it needs something to put there and it doesn't know what it is.
Yes. Yes.
It's interesting to think then if you have these, instances where like one individual sort of does that, and just sort of speculating, if we're taking all of this sort of co-creation to be functional. So, okay, one person does that. They see something. It takes on a very unique shape, like, I don't know, Hopkinsville Goblin or something like that. Now it has this fixed shape. You're talking about something that's, sort of working in the same way of like that, Schrodinger's cat, this idea of indeterminacy, and then it becomes that. Like now it's fixed, but it is almost arbitrary as to what it looks like. There's no like, grander archetypal symbolism or anything like that. Yeah, it's interesting to think about it in that way, because it goes very much against this idea of there being, common archetypes, and that this is just, one person's crazy imagination, but it fixed itself.
Yeah. And it also makes sense why Bigfoot sightings from different areas would be so different.
Yes, exactly, because they do differ quite a bit.
Yes, yeah. So what else do you have from your studies? What else stands out to you?
Oh, okay. Well, let me see. There is in 1922, and oh my gosh, I think the town is called Scribner, and I don't have my notes here. I have so many small town Nebraska names. I believe it's called Scribner, right? But in 1922, there was this guy who was a deer hunter, and he was hunting along this creek, and he sees this, like, and this is in 1922, before the flying saucer thing. He sees like a silver saucer zip by him at an incredibly fast speed, and then he said he sounded like it landed like 200 yards away from him. And then so he was like freaked out, kind of frozen, and so he starts walking kind of towards where he thinks this thing landed, and a flying entity zips by him and then lands and then takes off again. And so then he said it left tracks in the snow, and he was trying to find it, but then it disappeared. So this like flying saucer zips by him, this kind of big craft, and then like a couple minutes later, a flying entity zips by him. So this is a funny case. In Vallee, actually, originally this was discovered by Gray Barker, which I know. I love Gray Barker stuff just as a personality, but a lot of it, he was known to host things.
Oh yeah.
But so he originally found it. So I think a lot of people didn't take it seriously. But then in one of Vallee's Forbidden Science books, he talks about this case and how he found the report in Dayton, Ohio at the Air Force Base, whatever. I can't remember what the Air Force Base is there. But anyways, at the Air Force Base, when he was allowed to go through some files, he found this case from 1922. So I was like, oh, well, like the Air Force had it and maybe it's something. But I always love that because it's another flying humanoid case. I think that's good fun. We've had quite a bit of cattle mutilation. Nebraska is probably better known for two things, and that's corn and beef. And so we have cows grazing all over the state, especially in western Nebraska. And during kind of like the Linda Moulton-Howe stalking the whatever, I can't remember.
Stalking the herd.
Oh, no, that's Chris O'Brien.
That's
Chris O'Brien, yeah. Hers was a strange harvest?
Strange harvest.
Yes.
Yep.
Well done. She, talks about there's the Juergens Ranch, which is in western Nebraska, and they had, some UFO sightings that coincided with some very, 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 very bizarre cattle mutilations. And the cattle mutilations are tough. I mean, there's a bunch of them that were reported in UFO books, but I've actually, I'm currently one of my friend's wife's dad. Yes. Okay. That made sense. He is a rancher, a former retired rancher in Nebraska. And I'm actually meeting with him next week to talk about some of the weird experiences. And he says he had some cattle who were mutilated too back in the 80s that he has no idea how this happened. And he said a bunch of other stuff happened out by his ranch. So I'm pretty excited to talk to him. We definitely have the cattle mutilations. One thing that's kind of interesting that's kind of an ongoing story is that in north of Omaha, about 70 miles, is the Omaha Indian Reservation and the Winnebago Indian Reservation. And there is actually a Sasquatch hunting team called Res Squatching on the Omaha Indian Reservation. And they report just an absolute smorgasbord of high strangeness out there.
Really?
Bigfoot is obviously the entree that they kind of bring people in at. But they have orbs of light. A lot of times they talk about how these Bigfoot will appear out of a purple mist. They have little stick figures that that run around. One lady talks about like a gargoyle-looking creature landed on top of the bank on the reservation. And apparently, from the way people talk about it, and I followed like their reports almost like every day, that Bigfoot is just walking around the reservation like it's no big deal, like going through people's trash. They're so nonchalant about it. Like there was a story about the tribal police coming to a woman's house where she kept on having her yard was being disrupted and her chickens were being eaten by a Bigfoot. And supposedly, I have no evidence to verify it, but this is the story, that the tribal police found the Bigfoot underneath this woman's porch, and they were trying to shoo it out. I just thought it was such a funny visual to me. But so that really is going off, and they will take people on tours. If you donate to the tribal council, they'll take you out on an overnight. And I've been offered to go out a couple times, but it's been with big groups of 15 people.
Yeah.
And for some reason, I just don't really want to do that, and they kind of make it into a whole day. It's like, hey, bring your kids and we make a Bigfoot thing. And
you don't want the entertainment aspect. You want the data.
That's exactly right. So they told me they'll take me out, they really aren't charging that much, and so they're going to, hopefully before winter comes, I'll be able to go out there, but I may have to wait till spring. But that I'm very excited about because I've actually I reached out to a couple people who had gone on these expeditions. And the most hilarious thing is that some people say oh my God, we saw what looked like a big tall thing with glowing eyes, like a shadow. But a lot of people will say, you know what? It was okay. I was pretty disappointed. All I saw were these orbs of light. And I'm like, wait, what? You're disappointed in that? And so, yeah. But it's amazing.
No hairy ape.
I know. Isn't it funny? They go out there and if they don't get Bigfoot, but they get this other high strangeness, they're like, oh, the night was a bust. To me, I would be like, are you kidding me? That would be a dream come true for me. So yeah, hopefully I don't think they can make high strangeness on demand happen, but there seems to be, currently a lot of weird stuff going on, but it is this piece of land because both these reservations butt up against each other. So you're totally not allowed to go wandering on there.
Yeah.
So I want to do it right and wait until I have permission. But that I'm definitely excited about.
Have you had any experiences of your own?
Oh, man, nothing worth talking about, honestly. Like it's one of these things where I know people talk about the George Knapp paranormal kryptonite, but I do feel like, I mean, I have been into this stuff, Seriah, since I was like a little kid. Like I never remember a time in my life where I wasn't like intensely interested and also kind of trying to have these experiences. And I just haven't. Like, like I think maybe I want it too bad or something, and I go to these places, like I have been, anytime I've been somebody, in Atlanta, if I'm like stuck in Atlanta, working on something for a few weeks, well, when I have an off day, I am finding the weirdest place and going to it, like I'm always trying to confront the phenomenon or however you want to say it. But no, I really have not had any kind of confirmation experience, other than like weird synchronicities that, those can be very dramatic too. But like, I've never like really seen anything with my own eyes. No, not yet.
Not yet.
What was the weird thing? And maybe you can just talk about, maybe it wasn't the weird thing itself, but you could talk in general. Is it Seven Sisters Road, if I remember correctly?
Oh, yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, so going back to Minersville, that I was talking about earlier. Sorry, I know I'm jumping around a state that nobody knows anything about, but there's all eastern Nebraska. So Seven Sisters Road is like literally like an eighth of a mile away from Minersville. It's basically part of Minersville. But Seven Sisters Road is actually kind of pretty famous in the ghost hunting paranormal world. And it's just this stretch of road. There's kind of a folklore about it where this father had 7 daughters. He went crazy, killed them all, and hung them along this road. And so that's why they call it the Seven Sisters Road. Now, I've dug into every historical record one could imagine in this county. There's no mention of that. So I'm pretty sure the folklore is bunk. But people have had dogman sightings, Bigfoot sightings, apparitions. People hear screams at night. So, I mean, if you go out there, supposedly your car won't start, kind of all that jazz. I mean, every town has one of these. But Seven Sisters Road is like right by Minersville. So it's right in kind of like what I feel is the heart of the high strangeness in Nebraska. It's in this little tiny section. It's called Odo County, and it's right along the river, and it just has a history of so much weird stuff. So yeah, like while I feel like the folklore is, totally not real, I think the phenomenon that people are experiencing there is very compelling to me. And I believe a lot of these stories, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, that's very similar, I think, to some of the stuff that Tim has talked about with like Toad Road and Hex Hollow and
exactly.
Places there. I've just been rereading his
Yeah. And if you kind of wonder, because I talked to a historian and she said the story of Seven Sisters Road goes back a long time. And I was kind of, I was wondering, like, because of the folklore about this place, is that why the phenomenon appears? Because people have put so much emotional, like, anticipation on this place. Like, I always do wonder if, like, because I'm very interested, like a lot of us are, on the enchantment of place or the magic of place, right?
Right.
But I'm not certain if it's actually the location or if it's people.
That's the question I'm always asking myself too. And I wonder if it's both, sometimes. There have to be, I mean, I'm certain that there are places, not to go too far into like Haunted Planet, but I think that, there are places that probably have something about them, and it could be, I don't know. I mean, it could be what's the whole, is it quartz? Is that the thing that, the whole quartz thing. And, I've had, when I was driving back from Seriah's, actually, it wasn't an intense experience, but when I was driving back, I think the last time that I went up there to visit and shoot some stuff, I was driving through the area, I forget the name of the area, but right there in Pennsylvania where it's like supposedly all the quartz is underneath there. It's like the top of is it the Poconos? No, somebody's shooting me right now virtually because I'm butchering whatever the
it could be the Poconos though. Like,
is it or
that's right? That's like
Appalachians. No, it's part of the Appalachians.
Yeah,
Appalachians, yes. Anyway, and I had a very intense smell experience where all of a sudden And it was just, this is like the highway, going, through nowhere. I smelled flowers really intensely, and I'd only smelled flowers like this before at certain sort of sacred tombs and shrines in parts of India. Yeah, it was just like all of a sudden, like really, really intense. I started smelling it. And yeah, who knows? I mean, maybe there's a bloom of flowers happening there, but I was very surprised. It was, I would have thought too that the wind, like, windows open, going 70 down the highway, that it wouldn't have stuck with me if it was just flowers coming from somewhere. But anyway,
well, it's interesting no matter what, because of the emotional reaction it elicited.
Right. It did. It elicited a very specific emotional reaction from me. Yeah, it was very interesting. But point being, I do think that there are places, and maybe I'm disproving my point. Maybe that was just me, but I do think, even if I don't have proof, that there are places, as well as people who are probably making this. Yeah.
I mean, I tend to lean that way too, and I can't tell if that's just because I want that to be the case.
Exactly. That's probably the reason I'm doing it.
I do love the idea of like, ooh, there's certain places on this planet or in this country that are enchanted, and if you go there, you increase the odds of it happening. I actually think that, but I can't tell if it's because I want that to be true. But an interesting experiment, I think. Like, I was a big fan of Jeff Richmond, especially the episodes he did on this show. So I thought those were just wonderful. Like, really important lessons for me. I've listened to him multiple times. And, he talked about, like, look, if you want to have a paranormal experience, go out to a location outside of the city for multiple nights in a row.
Yeah.
And you will experience something. He's like, it won't be what you expect, but you'll experience something.
Yeah.
So it's
Richmond also, like, I mean, it really did. I mean, the Chapel Perilous was intense for him too, in terms of what he brought on, himself, he talked about that.
Yeah, he's kind of he's sort of like, when I listened to him talk, I just learned a lot. It was especially fun to hear, I really enjoyed hearing, because I heard Jeff on a lot of different shows, but what was so like gratifying to me was, it was like hearing two paranormal old war vet experiencers talking to each other, because you've had so much, he had so much, and like watching you guys listening to you guys compare notes was super valuable. And I learned like so much, because I feel like, you can read about cases all day long, but talking to experiencers for me is the most valuable thing, in these studies. Like, I just find it so exciting. Like, I love to learn. I love to like pick up on these patterns people have. But like, I thought Jeff was such an interesting, like, forward thinker. I really miss that guy.
Yeah, me too. Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back. Check out wheredidtheroadgo.com. You will find an archive of every show, right back to the very first one that aired January 26, 2013. There's links to all of our social media, Discord, Facebook, the Facebook group, Twitter, YouTube. You can pick up merch at our store that is linked on the page. You can become a Patreon and get extra content every month for as little as $3 a month. You can leave a donation, go through blog entries, and you can contact us if you have stories you'd like to share for a future listener stories episode. Stories at wheredidtheroadgo.com is the place to send them. For general contact, it's contact@wheredidtheroadgo.com. And if you want to mail me something, you can do so at P.O. Box 444, Ovid, New York, 14521. I'd like to take a moment here to thank all of my Patreons, because without you, this show would not be what it is. And I want to give a special shout out to those of you pledging $10 or more: Allison Cook, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, Chuck Shutters, Leanne Cherry, CJ, Tim, Andrew Nichols, Matthew Sproul, Christine, a blue second gen MR2 drifting around a Japanese mountain, Patricia Giaquinta, Alex Whitcomb, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Ann Witowski, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Big Boy Lemona, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, land of the crazy and communicable, Christopher Ernst, Craig Cicernos, Craig Parmenter, Diane B., Empty K., Eric Todd, J., James Lattimore, James Lindsay, Jim Pyre, John Bracken, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Cool Kitty, Kristen L., Laser Printer Jam, Lauren McLean, Linz Jackson K., Luke Osborne, MJ Armstrong, Jim and Sophie, Mark Brady, Matt in Delaware, Oli Andre Olar, Patricia W., Paul Jeffries, Philosopher of Mirrors, Ray Benedetto, Riker and Stark, Ron Dupre, Sam Sharon, Stacy Sherwood, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, Thunderboy, Tyler Glimstead, Verosh K., Vincent Trewell, Walker, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, Ren Collier, Stephen D., Amber Hall, and Craig Sagastumi. I thank all of you for the incredible support. And we are back on this episode of Where Did the Road Go with Christopher Ernst and Steve Berg, telling us all about weird Nebraska.
Oh, yeah.
Of all places. Now, Nebraska, if I'm not mistaken, is located in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
Yes.
Between Africa and South America, correct?
Yes. I mean, we're Atlantis, really.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
all right.
The concentric rings.
I've been saying it. No one's
The giant crystal that exists in the middle of Omaha that powers the entire state.
Most people mistakenly think it's sort of in the center of the country, but they're wrong.
Yeah. We're Atlantis, baby.
All right. So what other fascinating stories have you uncovered?
Well, I'm trying to give you a swath of all high strangeness. Okay, so this one's not in eastern Nebraska, but I'll throw it in there anyways because I got to throw a lake monster in there.
Right.
So in a place called Alkaline, Nebraska, very small little place, and kind of like it's in the northwest region, and there, back in the early 1900s, was a rash of these sightings in the alkaline lake of what they called the Walgren Lake Monster. And it was like this giant kind of like what they called like a giant dragon-looking lake monster that was in this kind of big body of water. And for like a 3-year period, people were seeing it. Now, I have suspicions that this is one of those newspaper hoaxes.
Oh,
because I guess at the time there was there were at this very specific time a lot of those going around about lake monsters. I discovered in this one book, and so I was like, oh man! And then I also discovered the guy who first reported it was a guy who was like known to be kind of like a yuckster in the area. So yeah, but I mean, still today they sell T-shirts and celebrate. So I still support. I support the folklore of it.
Not to mention that sometimes people make stuff up and then it actually happens.
Exactly. I was actually just not too long ago, I was reading Andrew Collins a bit in one of his books where he was talking about how, he would go visit these crop circles back in the 80s and 90s where clearly crop circle makers had made them, and he knew that.
Yep.
But he would go out there and hear weird, like disincarnate voices, balls of light, entities pulling people,
And circle makers have had tons of weird experiences.
Absolutely, and I find that so darn fascinating.
Yeah.
I love it.
When you were talking about tree structures, I think it kind of falls into the same sort of category.
I never thought about it like that, but yes, it's just kind of like a different version of Earthworks, really. Almost.
Yeah. Like whatever it is using these things to communicate, even if it's using us to create them sometimes, like crop circles.
Yep, that's very interesting.
We don't realize we're tools. They're just creating art.
Yes, we're just screwdrivers.
What was the you were talking at one point, I feel like, about, was there some slag that was found?
Oh yeah.
Yes. Was it a park?
Well, let's jump back into a quasi-famous UFO case. So, I mean, gosh, from my house right now, this probably happened 6 miles from my house right now. Back in the mid to late 70s. Gosh, I am so bad with years. I want to say it's 1977, but I'm not 100%. Could have been 76. In this place called Big Lake Park. Now, it's technically in Iowa, like right where I live in like the border of Iowa and Nebraska. So it's just right over the river. So I'm going to go ahead and claim it as Nebraska, if that's okay.
Sure.
But, and so, anyways, this one night, it was during like right around Christmas, this car sees this red disc-shaped craft hovering above Big Lake Park, right above this levee. Well, they didn't know at the time, but there was another car full of people who were seeing this exact same thing. But when they saw this thing, it was just hovering there and kind of wobbling, and it started releasing a bunch of like slag, like lava stuff. And so both these cars both made separate reports to Eppley Airfield, which is the airport here, and to the police and the fire department. And the fire department police came out here. And I actually think people from Offutt Air Force Base came out, which at the time was like the second most powerful like nuclear strategic air command place behind NORAD. But they came out and they, sure enough, they found a bunch of like, you know, what Jacques Vallee would term as metamaterial. And some of that material is what Garry Nolan and Vallee are actually studying at Stanford right now. So we got some famous slag. All right. So
in the first story, you were saying something about there being a piece of metal found.
Yes, at the Herbert Shermer thing. And that is actually something I just found out from my friend Rob. And he sent that to me just the other day. And he's like, hey, I came across this journal. And he sent me the journal. And sure enough, they found a piece of metal there. And that is like not in most of the literature. Like I never remember hearing about that in the Condon Report or anything. So
and no mention of where that metal is now, I bet.
No mention of where that metal is now. And the thing is, the slag I do know, and Vallee has it. So Vallee loved this case because he did a bunch of research. He came here. He's like, okay, so first thing we need to do is like, what place in Nebraska, what's the closest place that can create molten steel? He found out it was like a place that was like 70 miles away. And so he's like, okay, then someone would have to transport this liquid molten steel all the way to this place, dump it from the air. And so like he basically kind of like ruled out a hoax. He's like, look, we have material. We have like 9 witnesses. Like he loved this case. And that's why I think he's, you know, studying the material today. And you know, it's one of those pieces of and I'm not like the biggest like like the metamaterial stuff, like while I think it's neat, isn't like what I'm super excited about.
Yeah.
These topics. But it is, you know, a piece of tangible proof that they're studying. So, I mean, you know.
I wonder if this stuff is also in the same category as apports, you know?
Yeah.
It sounds an awful like it, yeah. Where, I mean, it just materializes, you know, like, yeah.
In which case, it might have a weird structure to it, you know?
Exactly,
right.
Exactly. Well, you know, they kind of talk about like, you know, a new term that is thrown around these days, you know, I think probably because of Diana Walsh's American Cosmic is the gifting fields. Right. The idea of like the field like in Arizona or New Mexico, or wherever it is, and that there's other places where you can just go out and find high strange metal.
And it's pretty interesting. I mean, I find it really interesting that there seems to be this, you know, kind of cult around it, and the fact that she's calling it the gifting fields. And, you know, I shouldn't say cult. I guess that's being disparaging because I really don't know. But Jacques Vallee is very interested in it. And that's sort of enough for me. And he seems to be increasingly, too. I mean, you know, that whole sort of, I guess it wasn't really a debacle, but the whole thing where, you know, he had the book that was going to come out about Trinity, and then it got changed so that Paola Harris had, you know, more credit. And I don't know, that could have just been so that he could use the material. But, you know, it was, I guess, worthwhile enough for him to say, here, we're going to change this so that he could talk about that. So talking about these materials seems important to him for whatever reason.
You know, it does. It seems like that's like what he's almost all about these days. Because I feel like the last like 4 or 5 interviews I've had, he wants to stay on topic. He wants to talk about the Trinity case, and he wants to talk about the material they're studying. And even I was lucky enough to actually see him speak about 2 years ago in Nevada, and he did talk about the Trinity case. And I read the book, and like, while it's not my favorite Vallee book, historically speaking, like the historical perspective, he even aside from the UFO thing, is quite fascinating. I find it, like, I recommend that book, not just as like a UFO book, but as a different perspective of, you know, post-World War II America. Like it is a pretty deep and like sometimes very sad book.
It is interesting. And I just, you know, it's again, that confusion of why, you know, no shade thrown against Paola Harris, but she's coming from a very different sort of place and like a different world of ufology that to me seemed a little bit sort of different and maybe more commercial.
Right.
But then again, you know, Jacques Vallee is doing forwards for TTSA books, and there's all this sort of crossover between, the UFO might as well stand for unprecedented financial opportunity, and weird mystic Rosicrucian mystics, who are obviously don't need the money,
right? Like, it's interesting because I know a lot of people have kind of been judgmental about how Vallee has conducted his research or who he's attached himself to, but
right.
I don't, and I don't either.
Sure,
while I actually know I shot a pilot for Comedy Central, and it was about UFOs. It was kind of about Anthony Bourdain, but it was High Strangeness, right? And we were able to shoot the pilot. And the only person who would let me come shoot a UFO convention was Paola.
Wow.
And she charged me $0.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
She gave me access. And we sat there and talked for hours. And we came to this kind of reasoning where I don't see this topic or phenomenon the same as her at all.
Yeah.
But she is a really nice person.
That's absolutely. Yeah.
I am not overly familiar with her. I think my only objection to her stuff in the Trinity book is that it's under hypnosis.
Yeah, agreed. The hypnosis, there's always an asterisk for me when hypnosis is kind of mentioned.
I think my misgivings had more to do with her involvement with kind of the Greer disclosure side of things.
Look, I was kind of, because she was really nice, and we talked off camera for a long time, and I was like, I don't know, I feel like you're talking about Adamski, this is fact, and she's like, because it is, and I'm like, well, okay, this is where we disagree, So she just has different ideas. I'm sure, a lot of the stuff I was saying, she's like, oh, she actually said you read too many of Jacques' books. It was kind of laughing me off. And
okay.
I'm like, touche, maybe I do.
Right?
So,
yeah, sure.
Because I surround myself in an echo chamber of people who think like me, probably. But
but Adamski may have had a real experience at some point. But you also got to realize that the stuff he wrote was written previously with a more religious context to it.
Absolutely. And
so you can't just throw that out,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I totally agree. I think I am open to the idea that Adamski did have some sort of experience. I just think once that experience ran its course, he had to make up new material.
Yes. Oh yeah.
And that happened a lot with contactees.
And that seems to be, that's the trickster phenomena there. That's Uri Geller. That's, Enfield Poltergeist. Maybe the Fox sisters. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Fox sisters are a weird one too, because, people are like, oh, it was proven a hoax. And it's like, no.
Yep.
One of them admitted to, hoaxing it in a way that seems like it would be really hard to hoax by cracking your toes and stuff. But, who knows why, if that was the case. And there are plenty of reasons why someone would want something to just get dismissed.
Yeah. I totally agree. I think there's kind of this point, and Yuri's a good example, because if you read enough about Uri Geller and watch some of the studies and listen to some of the accounts and data they have on him, I don't think anyone denied this guy has abilities that are completely confounding and unexplainable.
Yep.
But to the mainstream public, I remember my dad, when I was a kid, I was talking about Uri Geller. He's like, oh, he was in the Johnny Carson show and couldn't bend a spoon. And so my dad just threw out everything he's done, because he didn't look, and that's the thing about with a lot of UFO stuff. A lot of my friends, I had some friends, even though they should know better, I have friends who aren't into UFOs. But when that New York Times article came out last week about how a lot of they were talking about how the gimbal and the tic-tac were probably spy planes. My friends were like, see, man, they're not real. I'm like, dude, that's not what I care about. I don't care about that stuff. Please don't Right. But it's so funny. Once people hear that, they want as much as a lot of people want this stuff to be true, there's just as many people who don't want it to be true.
Absolutely. And it's funny because when all that stuff came out, I said, these are probably drones.
Yeah, same here.
And so now, the New York Times is like, these are probably drones. It's like, yeah, I know.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't mean there's not a real phenomena. It just means this isn't part of it.
Absolutely. And it also doesn't mean that they don't have reams of wonderful data that should be studied.
Right.
But
yes.
When it comes to that specific case, They probably chose it because it's not authentic.
Exactly. Yes. Look over here. Look at this one,
Yes, exactly. Now allow us to have, another $50 billion for defense budget.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The whole narrative around that, it's all been very, what's the word? I'm searching for a word. Like an academic word for it, really like based around the idea of like technology and machinery and the military. And, it none of it seems, besides, I think a couple of the guys, and I actually, I don't want to say that, they didn't experience anything. Maybe they experienced something that was brought on by themselves, but I feel like, besides a couple of them who said, oh, I felt strange since then, or I've had, psychic experiences, none of it smacks of a true, even like a, abductee visitation. There's something of it which feels very, manufactured, in some way. And I mean that in sort of the larger sense, not manufactured necessarily like it's a show that's put on. Well, I mean, maybe, but yeah.
Well, when you have an experience like that and you truly believe it's anomalous, it may shift your view of reality enough to make you feel a little weird for a while.
Yes.
And
that's absolutely. And that's, the what I call sort of the Greek mystery school paradigm of things, where you can, and who knows? I mean, there very well could have been some actual, like other enchantment that was happening with some of those, but in many accounts, the Greek mystery schools were about creating a situation through sound, light, drugs, that you were able to have some sort of mystical experience that was many times of your own making, or influenced by essentially some sort of advanced, not sensory depth tank, but like an immersive sensory tank where you're getting all these different kinds of sensory information thrown at you, and it's prompting that kind of experience.
In talking about all this, there's also, I just saw this recently, but it was actually from May, where Jeremy Corbell was saying that the U.S., what is it? I've seen the logs, I've seen the videos. What do you say? They something like they go up every day chasing UFOs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here it is.
I saw that.
Here it is. U.S. military fighters shoot at and engage UFOs on a weekly and sometimes daily basis.
Yeah. Yes, Jeremy.
It's like, okay.
I don't know. Like, I've never met the guy, but like, I feel like he would kill more flies with honey than he would all this vinegar. He's so aggressive. Everything's so aggressive and like urgent with this guy. I'm just like, man, this is not like, I don't understand what they're like. What are they waiting around for? Like, what is going to what is going to satisfy these disclosure hounds? Because I feel, to me, UFO activism is like annoying to me.
and oh yeah, absolutely. And then the question becomes with someone like Jeremy, like, is he a useful idiot for whatever government agency is pushing this, or is he just seeing dollar signs and going, okay, I'll run with this. Yeah, just tell me whatever.
Probably a combination of both would be my guess. Without having any kind of evidence or proof. Just going off what it seems like. I mean, like, the thing is, like, I guess, like, we're all, like, three of us are, like, roughly the same age, probably, like, Gen Xers, whatever. Like, we're old enough to have, because I've been to this stuff since I was a kid. This has just happened before. It's the same people involved. The same promises are made. And, like, I just, like, I feel, and also, like, if you were to pick one thing about this wonderful high strange phenomenon that we all love, this is the most uninteresting part about it, because it's not even about the phenomenon. It's about government, how government works. And I just don't understand. It's so boring to me. Like,
well, let's let the government that we don't believe in, anything that they say, let's let them tell us the truth.
Yeah. It's like, guys, you're going to be waiting forever. In the meantime, like, go out into a field at night and, like, that's the thing. I feel like, I don't know, Chris, I think maybe I was talking to you about this the other week when we were in Nashville. Like, I feel like I am so privileged to have been able to spend so much time reading and thinking and listening to stories and information about this stuff. This is a luxury, I feel, to me. Like there's a lot of people who like have so many real life stresses, 4 kids, 3 jobs, who don't have time to think about this stuff.
Right.
So when I do, I try to be discerning with the material I take in, because I realize it's such a privilege that I just don't have time for the disclosure stuff. And I want to hear about like people's experiences, how it affected them, and like listen to shows like yours and hear from experiencers like you, Seriah. Like that to me is like why I'm in this stuff.
Well, also this stuff is personal. Like it has it is a very personal phenomena. It doesn't necessarily look that way at first, but the more you look into it, the more you realize it has such a deep effect on the people who experience it, which would not necessarily happen if it was just nuts and bolts aliens.
Absolutely.
There is an awakening aspect to this that is very, very personal. So the government going out there and talking about it really doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, it's almost like when your favorite, cool, like for in your case, metal band or punk band or whatever, the band that you love that no one really knew about becomes like a top 40, like popular band, and they sell out.
Yeah.
That's what disclosure is to me. It's like, ew, it's like something I love became like, now it's like a government thing. That's not high strange at all to me, man. That's like,
and in the same way that a band gets signed and then the label decides, well, you need to sound more like this, you got to do this, and it just gets watered down. The same thing with this. It just becomes watered down to, let's we don't know what they are, but we got them on radar. It's like we've been getting them on radar for as long as there's been radar,
Yeah. I mean, go back to the ghost rockets and all that. I mean, like, this is not new, man. And they're never going to tell us exactly. They're never going to give us the best data they have, period. I do not believe that ever. No. Yeah.
They're going to give us stuff that's useful for them to give us.
Of course.
Maybe it's that like every new generation has to rediscover it in order for it to be magical or something like that.
Yeah, I guess.
But you're right. I mean, it is, and I don't think he was correct about many things, but there is something about the sort of the Time Wave Zero novelty thing of Terence McKenna's that I think is, something has happened with mass communication and media that is now allowing there to be this greater sort of recursive cycle of like nostalgia and like repetition of cultural memes that I don't even think we can parse it out yet until maybe 100 years from now, but something's happening.
Yeah.
Well, we are just about out of time. Can you both stick around for a Patreon?
Oh, yes. All
right. Steve, tell people where they can find you.
Okay. Well, my social media or whatever is Bergmaster5000, and I am currently starting a little YouTube channel where I go out and kind of document and investigate high strangeness in Nebraska and other places in the Midwest. I have one video where I went to the Van Meter Festival a couple months ago, and I had a blast doing that. So, yeah, I'm actually going to go shoot one tomorrow. So look for more fun little videos if that trips your trigger.
Okay. And Chris, you, of course, can be found at
brightrectangle.com.
All right. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We talked for a while on a Patreon segment with Steve, which was a lot of fun. He will definitely be back. I have some really cool stuff coming up. I have a 2-part show, or maybe a long show. I haven't decided. Initially, we did it as one show, but I have not decided how I'm going to put it up. It's a video show with the Snake Brothers about their trip to Egypt. We did it back in September, and I have not had a chance to actually put it up for everyone. So that's coming up soon. There's a show with Jeremy Vaney as we compare our Kundalini experiences and a lot of other very interesting things on the way. If you want to help out, become a patron. It's only $3 a month. Go to wheredidtheroadgo.com and click on the big Patreon link, and you'll get extra content all month long. There's also merch available on the website. You can also make a donation or any number of other things. All the info's on the website. I will see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.